comprehensive 2-hour briefing to the bipartisan House and Senate leadership, which to their credit is probably the most detailed budget briefing that I've received in my tenure here, and I do want to say that. They've obviously done a lot of hard work on the budget, as every administration does each year. With that said, there are some good things in the budget and some bad things, and I want to start off on a positive note and highlight some of the good things that are in the budget proposal that we do agree with, we being the Republicans in Rhode Island. First, there are no broad-based tax increases in the budget, and I think that's a very important point. We've made that point for years. We can't see the state go backward. Last year's budget, we made some budget adjustments, some tax adjustments. The corporate tax was cut. We cut energy taxes on businesses, and we made some advancements. And I'd like to see that continue. And I think that the indication that the governor does not see a need for major tax increases is important. I also want to touch on something else. I should preface this by saying that my comments, of course, have to be preliminary because even though we got a detailed budget briefing, we still haven't seen the budget bill itself. And the devil is, of course, always in the details. But with that said, the focus on helping businesses with their unemployment insurance premiums, that's something that we Republicans, in fact, one of our gubernatorial candidates last year made that a focus of his campaign. And to the extent the governor and her staff have figured out a way to attack that problem and help businesses around, that's a very good thing as well. We also strongly support fully funding the educational funding formula, as we have for years since it was enacted. That was enacted during my first year in office. I believe this is year 7 of an 8-year plan to fund that, and we think that's important. And we also applaud, again, I want to look at the details, but we know the formula needs to change. We know things need to be done to adjust funding because of the charter school issues that have obviously been a hot topic of debate here for the last 2 sessions. And to the extent, we have to, again, look at the details, to the extent the governor's budget addresses those issues properly, that's something we can get behind, too. Now, let's talk about some of the bad things that are in the budget, things that we cannot support. The issue here is really one of philosophy. I've said before there's really 3 main ways of looking at governments and how they approach economics at the state or federal level. One is what I call the progressive Democrat social left. Obviously, as Republicans, we're generally not fans of that. Another one is much more of a laissez-faire free market system, which the Republican Party in this country and in this state has stood for, not always consistently, but has stood for a long time. And then there's sort of a middle way. And because I say it's a middle way does not mean it's a compromise way. But this governor clearly believes in it. And that's having government stand and intervene in the economy, and as we put it, choose winners and losers. We don't see that as the way to go. One of the major problems we see with this budget is that the Commerce Corporation is being given an enormous amount of money to essentially give to people that it deems worthy of being donated money from the taxpayers. One example is that the budget books $35 million in savings from refinancing indebtedness from the past. That's a great thing, but to me, we should take that $35 million and we ought to reinvest that perhaps in our bridges and in our roads or something more substantive. We shouldn't be giving it to the Commerce Corporation folks, who, by the way, have yet to prove themselves. I'm not saying they're bad people, but they have yet to prove themselves. I don't know why we want to give them so much taxpayer money. Another thing, and I just touched on this briefly, is this budget contains far too much bonded indebtedness. Now, I always say this. Sometimes bonds are necessary. Sometimes bonds accomplish good things. There are, I believe, 6 or 7 individual bonds identified in this budget. I frankly would be surprised, based on the budget briefing we had yesterday, if all those bonds made it into the final budget passed by the House. But some of them may be good and some of them may be necessary, but I sincerely doubt that all of them are. We already have, she's asking for another $230 million in bonded indebtedness. And although I forget the figures off the top of my head, one problem Rhode Island has consistently had is far too much bonded indebtedness. Finally, I would say that there are no major structural changes in this budget. When I saw the budget outline, it struck me as a very safe budget proposal. And by safe, I mean easy politically, particularly for the Democratic Party. It's not going to offend anybody. I think we all remember last year when the governor proposed their budget, there were a number of items in there, and I'm not going to go into detail now, but they were like lightning rods. They generated all kinds of controversy, and for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, the House and Senate leadership actually stripped most of them out. This budget doesn't seem to do that. I think you're going to find this budget's very vanilla. But that's exactly the problem. Rhode Island doesn't need vanilla. Rhode Island needs more than vanilla. Rhode Island needs something that, as the governor said, and if you listen to her speech, and I agree with her focus on economic development, but Rhode Island needs more bold moves. Now, I have said repeatedly myself that there are no silver bullets, and I continue to say that. But we made good strides last year. This budget doesn't seem to have those types of strides. It doesn't seem to have too much of anything other than giving money to the Commerce Corporation. And finally, I would say this. The tolling plan, the roadworks plan, is a separate piece of legislation from the budget, but you really can't view them in isolation. If the governor truly wants to send the message that Rhode Island is open for business and is trying to improve the business climate, and I believe she does, the toll bill sends a mixed message on that. It makes us an outlier, and it's an anti-business bill. So I think that's important to consider. I'm not here tonight to talk specifically about the toll bill, but I do want to point that out. There are mixed messages being sent here. Finally, at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is this. Do we want a government that takes our taxpayer money and decides who best should make use of it? Or do we want, as residents of Rhode Island, what do the Rhode Island residents want? Do they want a government that says, you can keep your money, we trust you to use it and invest it properly and wisely? Republicans prefer that alternative. You know, it's up to the voters each election season, this season, 2018, 2020. We always have that choice every 2 years, but what do we want to see from a statewide perspective? What do we want to see our government do? We as Republicans do not want to see our state government take our tax money and choose to use it in ways they see fit. Because even the best intended people make all kinds of mistakes, and I won't rehash the past we've had in the recent past in that manner. So the bottom line is this. The budget does not make Rhode Island, I don't think, worse off, but it's a status quo budget. It really doesn't do anything to advance or improve the state. That's our major critique of it. So I do give the governor credit for her attitude, and I give her credit for the initiatives in it that are positive, but there simply aren't enough of them. So with that, I'll take any questions from anyone.
What, with the toll proposal, what is your, knowing this building well and the hearings for the next 2 days, moving quickly, and what's your analysis on the state of play on that?
Reading the tea leaves, having been here long enough to see these things go through, we have our February break in 2 weeks. There's a Finance Committee hearing in the Senate tomorrow and the House Thursday. That tells me the Senate will probably be voting on the entire plan next week, and I would suspect that the Senate will pass it on Tuesday or Wednesday, and the House will pass it, not with our support, by the way, we'll be against it, but the House will pass it on Thursday, and then everyone will take off and get out of town while the public reacts to that. That's my take on that.
Do you expect a lopsided vote, or do you think it'll be closer than that in the House?
I don't like to predict how Democrats will vote. I do think this, though. I think that the final vote tally will probably be pretty party line, with some Democrats coming against it. However, a lot of those votes are nervous votes. They don't want to vote for it. But you know, I don't get in the way of what the Speaker does with his members or try to tell him or his people what to do. That's between them.
Last year, the budget discussion going through all year, you guys were relatively restrained, not supporting everything, but do you plan on having a more active oppositional role this time around?
Well, you know, last year we wound up supporting the budget, and if you recall, it's because there were some major, as I said at the time, some major Republican initiatives that were in there, initiatives that we have been pushing for years that the Democrats adopted, and we were happy to cooperate with them, and I think it sends the wrong message to the public if you're always oppositional. When you say for years we need to do certain things, and then finally the Democrats, I would say, take your advice and do them, and the negatives that are in that document, every budget's a compromise, the negatives that are in that document are in no way outweighed by the positives. I think it's irresponsible not to support it. I think you need to show the public that you're serious in your role and that you're trying to change the state, but you're not just going to say no, no, no all the time. This budget proposal from the governor doesn't have all those positives that we saw last year. Now, of course, it may change as it moves through the House process. My sense is it probably won't change dramatically, but time will tell. To the extent that the Speaker wants to work with us, we're always happy to work with him. We don't always agree, but we do have a fairly good working relationship, I think, so we'll see.
And the charter school elements, are those a concern or mixed on those?
When you say charter school elements of the budget proposal?
Of the budget proposal.
Well, as you know, if you followed the debate over the charter school funding, which I should point out, by the way, was a debate that was not a partisan line vote. It was split. There were people on both parties on both sides of the issue. I happen to come from a district that's been very directly affected financially by the charter school, so I have a somewhat personal different interest in this than maybe some of my colleagues or other people in the state. I would say this, though. There's no question whether you support charter schools or opposed to charter schools, or as I put it on the House floor, you have to look at different kinds of charter schools. I support some, personally support some, and personally oppose others. You need to do something about the funding. And again, we need to see the details of the budget. But I know from the briefing there is a real attempt being made here to try to at least offset the financial hit that charter schools like the Merrill Academies have put on districts like mine, Woonsocket, Cumberland, Lincoln, et cetera.
You always get mad when the Democrats take a Republican idea and add to the budget and say they just thought of it. Anything in this year's budget that you think slows out of Republican pushes in recent years?
No, that's kind of my point. Like, when I got the briefing yesterday, as I look through the budget now, there's things in there I've already touched on that I don't like, but they're not earth-shatteringly bad. I'm not going to rehash past budget proposals from past governors. This is my 8th year here. I've seen some horrific budget proposals, including from the last Republican governor as well, who was faced with a very steep recession. So there's nothing in here, even the items that I do not like. I wouldn't say they're terrible. They're just not very good. They're not worthy of support. But I don't see much in here that's really worth supporting either. That's the point. We've always maintained that if Republicans were in control of the State House of Representatives and the State Senate, that we would put together a very different budget proposal than what the Democrats put together. We would. Sometimes the Democrats move closer to us, like they did last year. Sometimes they move a little further away, and I think this is a little further away.